Hi, this is Robert Clickybeard and David Anderson with the Commercial Landscaper podcast. We're going to take 20 minutes of your life to deliver some amazing business content from accomplished leaders to bring you value, to scale your business, and to better yourself personally. And really hopefully you enjoyed. Cheers, everyone. Hi, this is Robert Clickybeard with the Commercial Landscaper podcast. I'm excited to be joined again by Kevin Kehoe. Kevin, great friend, industry leader, consultant, many different hats as original founder for Aspire Software, and just always good guy. So Kevin, thank you for joining me today.
Robert, thanks for having me on again. As always, great to chat with you.
So Kevin, you're looking amazing right now, and glad to see you're doing well. I know you've been somewhat out of the industry for the last 6 months, but I'd love to, just you see the news, you see everything going on, you see, I don't know, you're always great in terms of following the political stuff going on, and you see things like, COVID, nobody talks about COVID anymore, you see gas prices going up, you see Ukraine, you see the stock markets going up and down. Tell me what's going on, Kevin.
Well, I think you hit on a couple of things, Robert, that definitely impact planning for leaders, managers of landscape companies. And there's this whole thing that's been going on for a while, of consolidation of the industry. And that's for a really good reason. And I think it's actually very helpful for the industry in that, the cost shock for gasoline is enormous, in my opinion. And it's certainly going to hurt people's bottom line this year. The stock market, that hurts in another way. As people don't feel as wealthy, they tend not to spend as much. So, you tend to see the residential sector suffer a little bit more before the commercial sector. But commercial will follow residential ultimately. So I think, when you think about how long is this gas price thing going to stay the way it is, I think it's going to stay a while. I think the administration's committed on purpose to doing this in a very weird way. Secondly, I think the stock market, it's funny, my brother's been in it for 35 years. He's been my advisor. And they still think this thing's coming back. But no one really foresaw what would happen to it right now as it's happening now. So that tells you that all the pundits aren't exactly right with what's going on. And whenever that happens, to me, it makes sense to get a little bit conservative in terms of, your growth, looking at your customer base and looking at the most profitable people and getting rid of other stuff. Looking at your investments, how much you're going to spend going into the future. Balance sheets always become super important, right? Getting rid of debt or consolidating debt and not expanding too much until you kind of get through things. And I think that's why the consolidation is really helpful to the industry in that, and this also, is you get rid of a lot of redundant costs when you combine 3 or 4 or 5 companies, right? Whatever Sperber was doing, Yellowstone was doing, Heartland, you could pick all these people. The consolidation definitely helps with that type of stuff. So I think the industry is in a pretty good place, but if you're a smaller res guy or a smaller commercial guy, I'd be careful now, right? I'd really look at my balance sheet. I'd try to get my debt down, get rid of unprofitable customers and properties, right? I would. I think it's a little bit scary going into the 2022 election cycle. So we'll see.
No, I agree with you 100%. I was talking to a couple of residential contractors just last week, and they're already seeing signs of people just being a bit more hesitant, taking longer to pull the trigger on some projects that have been priced out, and designs going back and forward for the last 6 months. I also had a conversation with a private equity fund manager this morning. We're actually across in Scotland, and they're just seeing some signs there of, there's a lot of people looking to spend money, looking to dump a lot of the funds they have available to invest, but as you say, a lot of people's financials are looking a little bit shaky. That's affecting some of the multiples. So there's just some weird stuff going on in the market right now. So I agree with you just about that. Things are beginning to change a little bit. A little bit hesitation out there. So pretty interesting.
No, I think the interest rates absolutely play a big deal in terms of valuations, right? And I haven't been involved in a deal space in the last 6 months, but I'm guessing that the multiples are coming down. People looking harder at deals right now, which is potentially good for a buyer if you feel like you missed the top, right? Because the multiples a year ago were crazy, right? I mean, when we sold Aspire, the multiple, and thank you for being an investor, were, as you know, quite unbelievable, right? For that type of stuff. So I think with interest rates and money more expensive, you're going to see banks getting tighter with people about, their loans on equipment, certainly on their lines of credit. So I said, now is not an expansion time. Now is a pull in a little bit, be smart time.
No, 100%. No, agree with you. So going to change direction a little bit here, Kevin. Last time you were on the show, you were in the process of launching your book. Tell me, how's that going? How's, you bestseller list, the top of the Amazon or New York Times list?
So in advance, in prep for this show, I actually went onto Amazon and typed in One Hit Wonder, which is the title of the book, and I came up number 1. So nice. That's good, right? So awesome. We're selling some things. When you translate that into total numbers, it's not astronomical because the book world is really interesting. I think we spoke a little bit about it last time, which is first-time authors. When I write a book, if you sell 200 books, I understand you did well. That's the dynamics. And so I think we're around 500-600 books, which says we're doing pretty well in that regard. And I just hired a new publicist, a woman by the name of Liz Kelly. She's worked with some other good authors, my goal with the book obviously is to sell some books, right? I'm never going to make money on this deal. But I'd like to sell some books because I'm a salesperson. I want to sell stuff. Second, I think I have something to say. And so I want to get on podcasts and get involved in conversations. I'm retired. I mean, you can only play so much golf. You can only read so many books. And I like to stay involved, right? And if I can be helpful, et cetera, talking to people, most of the podcasts, as I mentioned to you, that I do are really in the business area. Because if you boil the book down, it is my adventures or misadventures, quite a few of those, but everything I learned about dealing with people and how challenging that is, how important that is if you have any desire, plans, visions to be a leader or a salesperson, right? Because I think you really need to have those kinds of skills to develop the patience and insight to deal with people and, and most of all yourself, right? I mean, if you can't master yourself, I don't know how you're going to master your relationships with other people. So, the book is doing okay. I'm still working on it with the publicist. We're getting a lot of podcasts. We're talking. I had a couple articles accepted for Fast Company and a few other magazines recently, talking about, the people side of things, the leadership side of stuff. One example, then I'll stop, the whole Apple thing, where Apple asked their employees to come back to work a couple of days a week. And you would have thought, you were asking to do something like criminal. And I wrote an article out and I said, I really don't understand how organizations have turned upside down in such a short period of time. And then I explained why I think they did. And I also said at the end, and this is before Apple did, I said, Apple's going to cave because the world so much now in organizations is not about the customer. It's about the employees, right? How make the employees happy? It's like, how do you make the customer happy? All the rest of us are organizing around how to do that. And now it seems like the customer is a forgotten person. If you don't believe me, try go shopping in any supermarket today and try and find help, right? Try and get a product returned unless it's Amazon, right? and dealing with people, this whole service concept is kind of taking second seat, which, and I'll stop here, is where I think, you can create a business in landscape or anywhere else if you really focus in on the customer's experience, right? It's more than service. It's the entire experience of dealing with you, right? And not let the employees drive every one of your decisions, which unfortunately I think Apple ended up doing, right? Upside down world. So we'll see.
No, I mean, I can totally relate to some of the things you were saying there. I mean, you go into a lot of businesses now and you can see a big deterioration in service, especially when you go into restaurants, fast food places. I mean, you just see that level of service now of unbelievable decline, probably over the last couple of years. But it's interesting. I not necessarily preach, but I talk about this with a lot of my clients and the podcasts I'm on. And when you look at, for example, even landscape companies, everything around landscape companies is around the people part. As you say, you've got the clients, which are, I agree, 100% forgotten. Nobody ever reaches out to the client anymore to try and figure out how to improve their experience. We forget our immediate solution with trying to deal with employees is to bring in an HR type manager. Whereas I feel as though the first step is let's bring in a recruitment person to bring in the right employees, spend the time evaluating those employees coming in. But when you look at everything that happens around a landscape company, it's all around the people part. But we obviously still call it a landscape company, but it's really about people management. And I feel, there's not enough emphasis on that. But going back to your book, I mean, I loved reading your book, and there's so many examples in there of experiences and shares that you bring through your book. I'd love to just talk about how that then applies with either landscape company or any other type of business.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of things, that in some small way affect that. One of the chapters I wrote was called "Listen to Your Mother," and there's a lesson in there. And I just put together another article for an HR magazine, and essentially was shut up and listen, right? And many people, we find ourselves when someone's speaking, preparing our response. And so now we're not really listening to what anyone's saying. And if you don't listen, you can never learn. And if you don't learn, you can make big mistakes. And in that particular chapter in the book, I married the wrong woman, although my mother told me I was marrying the wrong woman. I didn't listen, right? And so one thing I learned over time was, and it's excellent in sales and it's excellent in leadership, is to listen. The second thing I think I talked about in another chapter is, humility. And what I mean by that is, and ultimately my role at Aspire, we did the first sale, my role changed dramatically, right? I was director of sales and marketing. And then my role really became two things. Number one, I called it walking the factory floor. I'd go to our office and I would spend 2 days talking to all my people. I'd sit down, pull up a chair, show me what you're doing. Why are you doing that? What do you think about this? And in that conversation, I learned about why are we doing that? And I could also share our vision about where we're going. We generated ideas. And I was told by the HR person, sometime later, he says, people loved that you did that. They felt like they were listened to. Second thing was the customer side. There's a thing called NPS. I don't know if you know what NPS is. NPS is called Net Promoter Score. It's used everywhere in industry. And essentially it says, are they more than satisfied? Because if they're more than satisfied, they're loyal. And if they're loyal, they'll buy. And we used to look at our NPS scores. And, if you were doing 75, it was considered good. You were within benchmark. And I thought that's an interesting number. But what I would do is I'd go back to the details, because to get an NPS score, you have to survey people. And I'd go back to the actual people and the comments they wrote, and I'd call them. And I go, tell me what you're saying here. And not only did the client love that because that improved their experience, but I learned a lot of stuff. And the problem or the challenge you can get in an a SaaS software company is you can over design the software where it becomes harder to use for people. And there are functions in it they'll never use, but you think they're cool. But when you listen to people, they're like, I only use those 3 things every day. And so when you think about how much money it costs for coders to go build that thing, right? You start to realize, why are we spending the money on those things, right? We could be doing something different, better. And so I talk about that in the book also, about humility. And maybe lastly, you're talking about some leadership stuff. I have a chapter called Obsession, right? I'm a kind that tends to get obsessed about things, right? Especially when I feel like I've been wronged and I need justice. And I realize that, I want to say this the right way, that people can and will disappoint you. You expect them to operate often at this level of heroism, and they don't, and it's not because they're bad people. It's just that they've got self-interest, and sometimes what you want them to do is not in their self-interest. It doesn't make any sense to them, and you're asking people to perform heroically. And I realized, that sometimes you just have to drop stuff, right? You can't fight every battle. You got to go focus in on, the 1 or 2 things that really matter. And the only way you know that is go back to step 1, which is listen. What we think as executives is often not at all what the front line thinks, like not at all. And so I agree with your point about the service. And I also think that's probably, and this is where I'm still involved in the industry with a thing called NCLC. That's the national competition every year for students. And hopefully this year, I'm funding some of this, is to add an extra day to really teach business, right? The idea of organizations and how they work, and how to behave in an organization, right? This is not your mom and dad anymore, right? This is not a democracy. We're not asking you what you want to have for dinner, right? You have to work first. I mean, you don't have 30 years of experience like you or I do. So it would be terrible of me to ask you to make those decisions because you don't have the wherewithal to do it. So I think I'm a big believer in, even though we need and are short labor and foremen, what we're really short of that's going to impact our success and profit landscape is what I call middle management, account managers, production supervisors, right? Without that middle there to manage in a large organization, big troubles, right? Big troubles.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And I applaud you for getting involved in, the college program. I think that's huge. But how do you start with a company teaching them to listen? Humility. That's just, I agree 100% that, what's the saying? You have 2 ears and 1 mouth. You use them appropriately. But how do you start that? Because
I think it starts at the top. Right? I think some of it starts at the top. If you're running, a $3 to $4 million company, you really can't be in day-to-day sales, production, management stuff. You should have people for that. Your job is now culture building, right? Which is that you can demonstrate listening and you can talk to people, whether it's the customer, right? Just go out with an AM, right? Because you just mentioned this. Go out with an AM and go to a meeting with that client where the customer's not happy, right? Because the AM, 25 years old, may have no clue about how to handle this angry 50-year-old wealthy woman, right? But you do, right? So I think it starts at the top to teach it, right? This is not like a training thing you go to school for, right? This is a learning thing through experience. And so I think some of it gets down to the role of the owner, CEO of the company, right? Where your job is less day-to-day business. I'm not saying you're not involved in that, but it's much more people, customer, employee, right? That's where you spend your time.
Yeah, and a lot of that just comes down to discipline. There's so many owners or clients I talk to, and they say, well, how do we take the next steps? And I said, well, why don't you just block off an hour or two block off an hour or two every week to either talk to your employees, talk to your clients. If you get disciplined about blocking off that time, then you'll make it hopefully you'll make it a priority. But everybody gets wrapped up in the day-to-day firefighting minutia, and they don't really take that stuff seriously. So as you say, it typically goes to that back burner. So
and I do, and
I agree.
I think also the industry owners hate overhead, hate it. Don't want to spend any money, and I've said this to my clients over the years 100 times. If I've said it once, is who said that account managers are $60,000 a year? Who said this? I go, if they're worth it, paying $80,000 to make them happy, they can bring money home. The wife doesn't have to work. I mean, think about the level of motivation, satisfaction you create if you pay more better, right? For the right talent. $60,000. I mean, where did that come from? I'm not saying that's the right account management number, but for good people who are interviewed well, as you said, right? Because recruiting is where it's at. Not just competency, but chemistry, right? You need both competency and chemistry to pay those people. And believe me, they'll perform, right? They'll perform. And so I think that's incumbent once you as owners step out of the day-to-day, that you hire more, right? Pay for good talent. It'll make your life so much easier.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Does people have to come from the industry?
Not necessarily. It helps, I think. In production, no, not necessarily. I think it helps, obviously. I mean, if you have language skills, etc. I mean, that's certainly an important thing to have in our industry. In account management, like I used to tell people, you want to be an account manager? And people say, well, how come my plants aren't growing? I go, sun, water, fertilizer. That's it. I don't care if you know the Latin names of the stuff. All you have to do is be a good customer service rep. You go, I'll figure it out. It's too much sun, it's too little sun. It's too much water, it's too little water. Not enough fertilizer, too much, right? I said, that's all you need to know. And that's how we actually used to joke about it. But I said, because by the way, your customer doesn't understand anything else beyond that, right?
Yeah. We used to say, green grass, no weeds, and nice flowers.
Simple, right?
Simple.
And you don't need how would I say? You don't need a landscape education to do that. But what you do need is really customer service sales skills, I think, right, to pull that off.
Yeah, for sure.
So no, it doesn't have to be from the industry.
No, I agree 100%. And we actually, towards the latter part of my business, we used to hire, people from outside the industry. And because we had such a depth of knowledge, I mean, hundreds of years combined within our company, it was fairly easy for them to get up to speed. And if they didn't know something, they were just honest with the client and said, hey, I don't know that, but tell you what, I'll come back to you within 24 hours.
Totally agree.
Yep. Simple. Any other parting shares from your book around the people? Again, simple thing coming from your book, often overlooked. I mean, you must have some great stories around the people side of things that.
I think I wrote it. I haven't read my book in about 3 months, so sometimes you forget after you write because it's quite a job.
Even other stories that you wrote your book and then you thought, oh crap, I wish I'd put that one in, or maybe this is coming out for book number 2.
Yeah, I'm actually working on book number 2, so I won't say what it is yet because then I'm going to have to go do it. I do think that, and I have a couple of stories about this. One in particular. Question yourself. Because there's a chapter I have in the book that talks about how I left New York one night in a February snowstorm and went to Florida, and then how I left Florida one day after I moved there, and I was a bartender and found out that I was partying a little bit too much and my life was going nowhere. And I think sometimes you're wrong, and you have to know that. You have to tune into the world around you, and no matter how strongly you feel about something, you got to check in and go, maybe I'm wrong about this, right? Maybe I'm wrong. And I think if you don't do that, bad things can happen, right? You get stuck in a place. For me, it made all the difference leaving New York and Florida, right? That happened over about a 2-3 year period. And it's pretty comical, the whole thing and how it happened. But for some reason, I listened to yourself. It's your gut. I mean, often we don't trust our own gut in terms of going, this is wrong, right? What's going on right now, wrong, wrong, wrong. I'm part of the problem, got to change. And I think that's a very important thing to do occasionally, right? As a leader or something else, but because you're probably right, things are wrong. And number two, making the change has a powerful effect on those around you, right? Because I mean, I'm so glad I got out of where that was, because for some reason I went from being a bartender to an MBA student in about 12 months, right? I don't know how that thought came in my head to go to MBA school at that time, but I did. And it changed everything, right? Because I got into a new place, I learned new things and new people, and I ended up in the job, a consultant, which I was built for, Robert. I was built for that work. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a consultant in the world. I was out of work for about 8 or 9 months, and I called one of my professors and I said, I can't get a job. And he goes, well, what are you doing? And I go, I'm telling you. He goes, well, that's not going to get you anywhere because you're not adding value. And I go, what should I do? He goes, well, I don't know you're that great, but I always knew you were a great problem solver and you're very persuasive. And he says, I go, okay, what do I do with that? He goes, that's what consultants do. And I said, what's a consultant? I had no idea. And that's how I got in the industry.
Oh, great. Great story. I love that. One last quick point. You talked about hearing feedback and having those checks and balances. You commented about a recent article I wrote around networking and how important it is to have that good network around you. And yeah, that's great for getting more business, getting connected, scaling your business. But it's also important, I feel, for getting, if you have the right people around you, giving you that true feedback on when you are wrong and where you need to improve.
Yeah.
I encourage a lot of 360 type surveys or formats even within companies where leaders can get feedback from their employees about good stuff they're doing, bad stuff they're doing. So I think all that is important as you're dealing with people, you're dealing with going through those leadership challenges. So yeah, I agree 100%.
I also think, and you're not too small when you're $2 to $3 million to create a little board of directors of other people around you, right? Not just your accountant and lawyer. Find some business people, right? I mean, the one regret, maybe not a regret, or the one wish I had is I never really had a mentor, right? I was so dumb, right? And so self-sufficient that I never asked anyone for help, right? And of course, that creates all the crazy stuff that happened in the book because I did so many dumb things that taught me the lesson. And never having a mentor, I think, would make all the difference. Having a small board of directors for an owner who can tell you the truth, business people, not an accountant, not a lawyer, business people in town with whom you deal, right? It could be one of your vendors, it could be one of your customers, right? I think that's super powerful to help you as a CEO leader become better at what you do.
Yep, no, I agree 100%. I encourage that all the time. Well, Kevin, tell people how they can get in touch with you, how they can get hold of your book. The audience will be keen on hearing that.
Thank you, Robert. There's a website. It's onehitwonder.site, S-I-T-E. And there's tons of information there about the book. Amazon, if you go to Amazon, type in One Hit Wonder, it comes up first, as I mentioned, at least as of yesterday. You can purchase the book there. And also on my website, there's tons of articles and blogs now, right? As we start to, add to and discuss some of the chapters in the book that you could find out there. My email is real simple. It's my first, last name, Kevin Kehoe @me.com.
Cool. Thank you, Kevin. I'm sure you're also available for podcasts, for
Absolutely.
speaking engagements,
Love to.
all that type of stuff. So, and we actually, shameless plug for our event. We have our Bruce Wilson and Thought Leaders Retreat in July, and we'd love you to come along. I'm not sure what your travel schedule's like, but I'd love you to come along to join us for that event. We have some great thought leaders there as well. So, Kevin, really appreciate your time today. Always good to see you. Glad to see you're doing well.
Please send me some information on where it is.
Okay, cool. Kevin, thank you very much. Always good to talk to you.
Robert, thank you much.
Okay, take care. Hopefully that was pure dead brilliant for you today, and you got some great takeaways for your business or for your personal life. This is Robert Clinkenbeard along with David Edmondson. I would love to get you and your friends to join us on your journey. If you have any ideas for future speakers, or if you just want to pass this on to friends, family, other business colleagues to sign up and subscribe, that would be awesome. Anyway, thanks everyone, and have a great 2022. Cheers.